right. So in this portion of the interview, I'd like to talk to you more specifically about Captain Canuck and how this whole Canadian icon started. What inspired you to start Captain Canuck?
That happened just after I joined the church. I met a fellow at church by the name of Ron Leishman, and we became friends fairly quickly. In fact, I had actually seen him at Red River College. He had attended, he was a year in ahead of me, and I actually saw him at the school. And then I didn't know him, like I didn't know what his name was. And then I go to church, and there he is at church, and that's when I find out he's a member of the church. And so we became friends. We would get together, and he was the one who presented the idea that, there should be a Canadian comic book with a Canadian superhero character. And we talked about it, and,
Why did he come up with that?
Well, he was into cartooning and comic books.
Okay.
I wasn't very much into comic books. I looked at them every now and then, but never really thought about drawing them.
So was he big into, like, he had all the Marvel comics, and was
he
at
had
that time?
some comics. He had some comics. His art style was not comic book style so much. His art style was very cartoony.
Like comic strip style?
Yeah, very comics. In fact, he did eventually do a comic strip.
Okay.
And he used to, some of his stuff was hilarious. He really was good at writing funny material, you know what I mean? And tunaday.com was a website he developed eventually, and he had a pretty good success with that. And he did, like I said, he did a strip. While he was a school teacher, he did a strip. But anyways, it was Ron who had suggested the idea there should be a Canadian superhero. And we talked about it. And we actually, back then, it was either Captain Canuck or Captain Canada. One of those two choices.
Yeah.
We really felt that was, what it should be, one of those two. And we just talked about it. Anyways, I ended up moving in 72, and then I came back. And so there was some time when, there was not even thinking about it. But, and I think it was about 70, it was around in 73 that I really started to get serious about it. And I remember it was in 73 that I walked into a Hudson's Bay store, and I saw this sweatshirt, and it was actually a drawing of Superman, an old drawing of Superman where they'd removed the emblem from his chest, and they'd put a maple leaf, I think it was a maple leaf there, and then it had written underneath Captain Canada.
Oh,
yeah. So
they stole your idea.
Yeah. Well, so no. All I said to myself was, okay, scratch Captain Canada from the possibilities here. You know what I mean? But I soon found out there was at least three other Captain Canadas floating around.
Oh, really?
And they were not.
And were they superheroes, or were they?
No, they were.
Or were they like?
They were just ideas. They were ideas. There was a Captain Canada. It was a really goofy comic strip. I think it was only published in university papers, and it was really goofy. And the guy had moose horns.
Oh, okay.
So
he was kind of like poking fun at.
Yeah. It was
Canada.
really goofy.
Okay,
yeah.
All right.
And I think there was one other at least, and Bruno Garussi I think had a. Well, I know he had a Captain Canada that was used in an ad or something. So I just remember saying to Ron, okay, it's Captain Canuck. that's
settled.
simple.
That settles it right there, right?
Yeah, and so, and I think it was probably around 70. It was around 73 that I started to do some drawings. I started to really look at comic books.
Wait,
seriously.
Okay. So now, when you and Ron got together, was it like to do collaborative things, or was it just hanging out?
Chatted.
Or?
Yeah, we just chatted. We never worked on it together. In that sense, Ron was kind of like a father who kind of, and then leaves. Like,
okay.
An absentee father in that sense. You know what I mean? Because he, I never would have done it without his influence.
So he just sort of...
He just planted the idea and then said, well, goodbye, So I wanted to.
The creative part of it was all you. You wrote everything. You drew everything. You designed everything.
I was a one-man band back then.
Okay.
Now, in all fairness, though, that I was hoping that Ron would work on it with me. I just wanted to help for one thing.
So he was already an established cartoonist at that point?
No.
Or was this...
No.
Oh, okay.
Ron had finished school, but he was planning to go on a mission.
Okay.
So what he ended up doing in around 73, I think it was in 73, he went out to Western Canada and worked in Alberta, and he was up north, and he was working doing in the oil fields. He worked for a little while, and just to make money. You could make a lot more money out then. Even back then, you made a lot more money doing that kind of work to save for his mission. He ended up getting called to France, and in those days, you had to pay. There was no equalization.
You paid whatever it
cost. Whatever it cost, and that was an expensive mission. And it was a 2.5-year mission too.
Oh wow!
By the way,
wow.
So
he was
busy.
Wait,
getting ready.
Who's older, you or him?
We're both the same age.
This is 21, 22 years old, 23 years
23,
old.
yeah.
23.
Yeah.
Wow, so you're both just kids still.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't think that then, but
yeah.
So Ron he ended up going on his mission when he was around 24, 25.
All right.
And so he like I said, he was busy working. I communicated him. I used to write letters to him, and they'd be some crazy place out in Alberta, I'd never heard of. You know what I mean? And we stayed in touch all that time, and I started seriously working on it about the time he was leaving on his mission.
This would be
74.
74. Okay.
But it would have been late 74. I think that's when he went on his mission. Was in 74, early 75. See, what I ended up doing is I got really serious about it. I started to do all the research on distribution and printing and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
All I had at that point was 3 or 4 pages of artwork and no story yet. I had no
just the idea that Canada needs a superhero.
Yeah, exactly.
Was where it was at.
Yeah, it was just the story. The story was very the 3 or 4 pages really just had the guy in costume. And it really didn't say anything about the character or, what I mean? It was just visuals. That's all it really was. You know what I mean? And I was also doing a few other things, to make a little bit of money. But and then I borrowed some money with my parents' help, $7,000, and I was able to get a printer who would extend some credit. So that's when I seriously sat down and started working on it. That's when I came up with the storyline. And it was kind of later in the game, you know what I mean? It was finally, okay, now I have to really do something here. And
was that natural for you to write the storyline? Like, you're a visual artist by nature.
Yeah.
Was writing...
No, it was a real chore. I mean, and the first issue, when I look at it, it's, you know what I mean, I cringe. But I really think that writing and drawing are very much learned skills. I mean, people think, you have to be born with the talent, but I'm not so sure. I think you're born with a keen enough interest, maybe, to hang in there long enough to develop the skill. You know what I mean? I think that's more what it's really like. I think let's face it, there are some people who are naturally gifted in music, and they have the voice, they have they have the tone, all of that, you know what I mean? And they're just naturally a part of their being. And maybe to a certain degree that's true as visual artists, but I think you still have to learn and practice a lot.
You got to do the hard work.
Yeah, more so than somebody who suddenly can sing real well and can carry a tune without any difficulty and all that kind of stuff. So,
when was the very first issue? When was that?
Okay, so I started working on it, like I said, in 74, late 74. and the first issue came out in May of 1975.
Okay.
And I should point out too, one of my greatest efforts was to try and sell ad space in the comic book, because, my research showed that I needed to find sources of income to make this thing work.
It wasn't the sales. It wasn't just.
No, it wasn't just sales. I couldn't count on just the sales of the comic book. They were, comic books were 25 cents each back then, and my first issue was sold at 35 cents, and it had an extra page, and the quality of the paper was a little better. So I felt that it justified, a whole 10 cents increase, which was kind of earth shattering at the time, you know what I mean?
Was that a big deal for a kid to buy a comic book for that much money? Was that?
It was. I know it seems kind of strange nowadays, but, when what were you making back in 1975? You might be making $2 an hour tops or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I remember, even as a crest designer, at one point I was making $125 a week, and that was considered really good. That was considered a really decent income for a person that age. 120 was that an hour? You know what I mean?
So when the first issue hit the shelves, how was the reception?
It was pretty big. The media across Canada covered it. It was the first item on the national news. It was, Time magazine. Every newspaper did a story on it.
Kind of like if you build it, they will come kind of situation.
What the interesting thing too, I might point out, back then I did a lot of interviews, and back then they actually paid you. I went and did an interview. I had to go downtown Winnipeg to do an interview for CBC. They paid me $50 for that, and I'd be flown here, flown there. They would cover that. They'd cover my hotel, etc. That doesn't happen anymore.
Oh, sometimes you have to pay to get in the door.
Back then it was very different. So nowadays, my goodness, they'll.
So Canada finally has a superhero.
Yeah, it was. I think my timing was right. I mean, and it wasn't like I was doing all kinds of sociological or some kind of surveys or research about the temperament of the country. It was just all intuitive. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, a comment I made right at the introduction of this interview, and I just read on Wikipedia that this was the first successful Canadian comic book since the decline after World War II, the decline of the comic book industry in Canada. Is that very true? Like, if there's no there's no Canadian comic book out there that was actually making any money doing, that was successful at all. Was that true?
Well, I guess so. I mean, I've never researched that, but there was a magazine called Orb.
Yeah.
Just before I came out, and it was a magazine that had a number of different. It was an anthology kind of magazine. It would have maybe 6 different short stories. It was all black and white. You know what I mean, in magazine format. That didn't last very long, but it was It was closer to what I was doing than anything else that was going on. The first issue, I printed. Here again, I'm naive. I'm ignorant. How many do I print of the first issue? I talked to the distributor. He can't give me an awful lot of feedback so I ended up printing 200,000 copies, which, wasn't a huge number for comic books back then. There was titles printing twice that easily.
In Canada?
No.
Okay.
There was none being printed in Canada.
Right, okay.
But
this would have been the largest of its kind. In Canada.
Yeah, and in reality, the distributor only got about 120,000 on newsstands, and a few American cities, border cities, were distributed to, but it sold very, very well. It was like
fantastic.
It just sold out in stores all over the place, and because even I was getting phone calls and letters. Remember, this is before email. And from stores saying, I sold out the first day. I can't get any more from the distributor, and in a few cases I actually supplied stores that directly. So it sold very, very well, and all that media attention really helped a lot.
And now 1975, were kids into? I mean, well, first of all, was it just kids buying comic books, or was it like the demographic was
back then? It was mostly kids.
Mostly kids.
I would say I don't know what it would be, what the percentage would be, but it was largely teenagers and anywhere from about, I'm going to guess, about 10 up. You know what I mean?
So were these kids? They were already diehard comic book fans. They were just all Marvel or DC or whatever was on the bookshelf. Once they see Captain Canuck on the shelf, they just love it. They just soak it up, and they finally we have someone that we can call our own.
Yeah, I think that was the reaction of a lot of people.
Yeah,
I mean, I've heard that story from hundreds of people. Well, I've when I go to comic book conventions, I get people come up to me who, are close to my age. I mean, they're 10 years younger than I am. You know what I mean? A lot of them are 10 years younger. And and they tell me, I remember buying the very first issue. I remember exactly where I was. I've heard that story 100 and 200, 300 times at comic book
really made an impact. Yeah. All right, so that's issue number 1. How many issues were there at that time?
Well, I only did 3 issues in that first year. Remember, I'm doing everything myself. I'm trying to sell ad space. I work really hard at that part of it because I think that will be an important source of income. I never did do all that well. Never did very well with ad sales. Were
you your own marketing guy?
Yeah.
Were you your own sales guy?
Yeah. I did everything. I was doing everything, but at the same time I was learning everything too. I was new at everything I was doing. I'd never drawn comics before. I'd never written anything before, really, hardly. Mm-hmm. So, no, it was a lot of learning going on. During the process, we developed a better method of coloring comic books, which ended up being used by other publishers. And this was by, putting acetate over the line drawing and coloring the acetate and doing a separation of the acetate overlay and then shooting the black as a line shot. Because remember, this is long before any scanners.
Yeah.
It all had to be done in front of big stat cameras with use color lens for filters. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So it is a whole different process, but we came up with a method that was used for years. Even when scanners came along, they still used that for a while because Photoshop changed all that.
Yeah.
Very eventually. But so the other thing, so what happened was, after I did issue number 1, a fellow came to my door by the name of George Freeman, and you'll see his name on that one on those IDW books because he was very much a part of early Captain Canuck history, and I could see I loved his art. I mean, he's terrifically talented, and eventually he came to work with me. I remember him showing me his work, and I'm just totally dazzled by it. Then he goes away, but he doesn't leave me any contact information other than the fact that he worked for a tombstone engraver. And I remember phoning a whole bunch of tombstone engraving places. Is there a fellow by the name of George Freeman working there? No? Okay, thank you. Hello, is there, And I never did find him that way. He just showed up at my door another, 3 weeks or a month later. And I said, George, where have you been? And anyway, so he came to work with me. I was already almost finished issue number 2 when he came along, so he played a big part in issue number 3. He actually did the John feature at the back of issue number 2 was his first art. I think there's 3 or 4 pages that he did in that edition. So, and in my second issue, I have an article from the Ensign in my second issue. All about the effects of media, in fact. So
wait, what's this about the Ensign?
An article that was in the Ensign I reprinted in the second issue of Captain Canuck.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
With permission from the author, of course.
So, and what was it about?
The media influence. The influence of media. like television and movies. Really, that was really all it was discussing. But exposure to violence and things like that, how it could affect a person.
So you're instilling good, trying to steer. If you have a huge demographic that reads your stuff, you might as well do something good with that.
Yeah.
Is that what you were doing?
I feel with Captain Canuck, there was some violence in the stories, but I kept that to a minimum, and which I think helped me develop as a writer, because it's so easy to just rely on hyper-violent kind of action in the storytelling because that'll have the desired impact, rather than trying to come up with something that is a little more intricate in plot or characterization. And so anyways, I included that article, and I did make statements about violence, right in that issue, in fact. So
yeah, this is early in your writing, but were you conscious of would you purposely put in social commentaries into your writing?
I was the only comic book where my character actually prayed in the stories.
That's quite remarkable.
Yeah. And I got all kinds of flack on that. And I mentioned in the very first issue that I was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In the very first issue, I mentioned that.
Yeah.
And I had a position that I wanted to make clear that, I guess right from the beginning, that I wasn't going to delve into certain story aspects that either were sexual or violent, or so I wanted to make that, and I was hoping that the comic book series would have an influence upon people to know something more about the church. And I actually got a phone call from a guy from, I think it was from South Dakota, who read that and said he was read some comments I made about the church, and said told me he was going to go to church. He said, there's a Latter-day Saint church near here, and I'm going to attend it next week. And it just, and he obviously a comic book fan, you know what I mean?
Isn't that wonderful?
And Claude Saint-Abbé joined the church. He came to work for me, and he joined the church too. So yeah, we had a few people. But one of the other things I did is, when I mailed out copies of the comic, I included church pamphlets. Thousands of them went in. Wow. So there'd be, a copy of the comic book. People would order a back issue, and I would send them, Joseph Smith's testimony or whatever.
Yeah.
I had, I would get my supplies, and I don't know.
Did you receive any flack for that, or was that?
I received flack from that from my family, of course. Were really my parents and were really upset about me doing that. And I remember being on, As It Happens, the CBC show.
Yeah. I
was on that. I was interviewed on that show, and then about 2 months later, something like 2 months later, they phoned me back and said, could we interview you again, and we want to have this guy from some store in Toronto who refused to carry Captain Canuck because of its religious content. Wow. And they wanted me to be on that show with him. I guess maybe he was an atheist or anti-religious or whatever. I don't know what his stance was, because the show never happened. The guy backed out at the end.
Yeah.
But I think just a day or two before it was to air.
So there was some controversy about that.
Even newspaper articles. There was even newspaper articles about my religious attitude. Canada Press did an article about my religious position, and that was, I remember picking up in newspapers all over the place, picking up copies of the article, and just stumbling upon him, and it was basically saying, come as a Mormon, and he's flagrant about his position, about being a Latter-day Saint in the comic book series. And so they're saying, the way he writes, Captain Canuck is a Mormon. You know what I mean?
Oh,
that's what their attitude was, right?
Yeah.
So, but I never really intended him to be a Mormon in the end. You know what I mean?
So is he a Mormon?
No.
Okay. But he's
just a good guy.
He's a good guy who believes in God.
Yeah.
And he trusts in God. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey,
I never got to that. I never thought that through far enough. You know what I mean? Well, but I came to the conclusion, no, I can't make him a Latter-day Saint, because then it just opens up too many problems. If I have him doing something like beating somebody up, then what kind of
Right. Now, I don't know. Is that our attitudes changing about that, or is it pretty much the same, or is it maybe back in the 70s? Maybe you could do something like that. I mean, you certainly tried, and you still got flack. But today, could you do that, or is that
I don't know how much it impacted our sales, because the comic book series always sold well, and because we got better and better at it.
Was it more like, when you open up your package, the little pamphlet that falls out? Was it more like it was looked at like sort of like an advertisement, as opposed to it? This is the author trying to share a message with you or anything like that.
I don't know how people exactly would have viewed that church pamphlet that would have been included, because there would often be in that envelope, there'd be a copy of the comic book, and there'd be, we used to send them little visors and stickers.
Just freebies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be
just one other freebie that, in my opinion, was a lot more valuable than the stickers.
Yeah. Now, today, I guess the Ms. Marvel is a Muslim. Did you hear about that?
Yeah.
First of all, she's a teenage girl who is Muslim. And that's the new superhero.
Yeah.
Right? And there was a little bit of controversy, but that's very... With today's... people are trying to be more tolerant and trying to be more open-minded about all of the variety out there that we have. And so it's, I've heard on CBC, and I think it might have been As It Happens that talked about it, the newest Marvel superhero was this Muslim teenage girl that's in high school, but she fights crime and all that stuff. And I don't know.
Well, in my humble opinion, I think that was, the publishers or the editors decided, let's make her a Muslim solely for the PR benefit, the media coverage that they would receive on that very fact. That would just, because it's very hard to get these titles recognized. Or
white teenager wouldn't sell as well in this climate, in this political climate, as the Muslim.
Yeah, it makes her stand out from all the other titles. There's so many titles now, and it would just make her stand out, and would give the media something to talk about.
Yeah,
and that's exactly what you want them to do. Talk about your new title to help its sales. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and that's what, of course, that's what helped Captain Canuck. It was, the first real Canadian superhero, and that gave the media lots to talk about.
And he prays to God.
And he just happened to pray. But I didn't label him. I never labeled him as a Mormon, from the get go. Never did. And I just didn't. I just never thought of making it that blatant. I just, I don't know. I just didn't think that would be the way to go. And I don't. And I don't think I analyzed it enough. You know what I mean? He was just obviously he's a good guy. He's your stereotypical good guy, just like really, and that's what Superman was too.
Yeah.
You're just your stereotypical,
he was the honest and pure in heart kind of,
true blue,
a real good role model, really.
Yeah, and I just really followed that same model for Captain Canuck.
Yeah. Right around this time, the political turmoil in the world, did any of that influence your writing? Like, this is, right after
Cold War.
Cold War, a couple of years after Vietnam. This is just a few years after this other great Canadian icons coming out of Winnipeg. The Guess Who are singing "American Woman," which is really a criticism of America's foreign policy and all that stuff. Did any of that influence? Was that? I mean, this is the hippie era. Did that influence any of the writing? Did that influence any of the social commentaries you may have made throughout the comic?
It wasn't very complicated. I mean, with Captain Canuck, I wanted to make it a little more realistic in the sense that he would be dealing with conceivably real villains. And so I had him fighting communists, which of course, we were in the middle, that was Cold War era.
Cold War, yeah. Okay, so that...
And and in the first issue, he deals with this kind of renegade communist who wants to let off nuclear missiles. And so basically that's what I have him doing, is fighting terrorists. And this is before there was the kind of terrorism that we have today. You know what I mean? The more, I would call them the more sophisticated kind of terrorists today that are, and he worked for CISO, which was a Canadian organization created to fight terrorists.
Was that a real organization?
No.
Or that was a...
CISO is...
That's a fictional...
Yeah, it was fictional.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about CISO is that I started, in 75, and CISO, was born in 75, obviously, when I started writing Captain Canuck. In 1985 is when CSIS came into being, almost exactly 10 years later. Yeah, and CSIS is Canadian in... I can't remember what
intelligence.
Intelligence. Yeah. So
yeah,
I always like to say that I paved the way for CSIS.
You sure did.
I did all the heavy lifting for them. You know what I mean?
And I think I was reading, in 1993, in futuristic 1993, Canada is the most powerful country in the world.
Which, I mean.
Which I thought it was. Why I thought it was, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not?
Yeah. Well, that's why I said it in the future. And in 1993 seemed way off to us back in 1975. It seemed so far in the future. You know what I mean? And I didn't want to make, I didn't go 30 years because I thought, no, it's, you know what I mean? I think I can deal with, say, 18 years in the future because I didn't want to have things...
you didn't want space travel and
that kind of stuff. So anyway,
did you some of the things were there some futuristic kinds of things that you were throwing in there?
Oh yeah, we had, eventually we had hovercrafts which we had people driving around in regular cars, but we also had people driving around in hovercrafts. So it'd be kind of like the old days, just as the automobile was being introduced. You had still people driving around with horse and carriage, of course. But now you're seeing more and more of these automobiles. So that's what I kind of envisioned.
Were they like super futuristic automobiles?
No,
or were they?
No, they weren't. If you look at the comic books, they didn't look super. No, I don't think they looked all that. They looked to us. They were designed to look futuristic, but they weren't crazy looking,
I know that's the challenge for whenever you're writing anything for the future. I remember watching Back to the Future and looking at the commentaries that they were saying, we're predicting 30 years into the future, and we know so well that we're going to get it totally wrong. So if we're going to get it wrong, let's get it really wrong. And so, it's 2014 today. Next year's 2015. I don't see any hoverboards or flying cars or hydrators or Mr. Fusions. So I'm waiting for those things still. But they went really. They got really creative in their future predictions.
Yeah, it's the hovercrafts were probably one of the most. Oh, and communication. We had that.
What kinds of things were you dreaming up for communication?
Well, communicate, just, sort of like Dick Tracy kind of stuff, when he was way ahead of his time.
Were they they were talking to their watches?
I don't, I have to look at a back issue, but communication was built right into the costume and that kind of stuff, which is...
That's pretty bang on.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't... maybe even in 75, that wasn't too difficult even back then, you know what I mean? It would just be bulkier, that's all,
Yeah. Just yesterday, I was in Future Shop looking for some headphones, and I saw the new Samsung Galaxy phone, and it came with an accessory, and it was a watch, a smartwatch.
Oh.
Which your phone doesn't even have to be on you, but you could be accessing everything from your watch.
Interesting.
Talking to it. It's got a little camera on it. You can.
Wow.
You could. What else could you do? You could, remote control your. If your MP3 player is, you could switch your songs right from your watch and kind of do everything. Kind of access the internet, send emails.
Wow.
So all that futuristic,
yeah,
Dick Tracy kind of stuff. It's pretty. Yeah, it's pretty bang on. Science fiction becoming science fact, I guess.
Yeah.